Okay, McKenzie, it's just you and me today, and I had a interesting experience yesterday. I need your thoughts on it. I
Shoot
was
it.
Christmas shopping. I mean, we're right now at the recording of this 4 days away from Christmas, and I was shopping for my brother's girlfriend, and it was
Okay.
just one of the stranger things. Like I
Which brother, HD? You have 5 brothers, so
both.
let's
So yeah, it's
let's
true.
narrow this down a little
Well,
bit.
I have four brothers, so I'm one of five boys. But the older brothers, so they both have girlfriends that are coming to
Yep.
Christmas this year for the first time.
Wow.
And I'm someone that I like to understand someone's fashion and really buy a gift that's going to be more suited for them. But I noticed that a lot of the stuff I was buying would be more the stuff that you would expect your boyfriend to buy.
Mm.
Like a handbag that's just kind of reminds me of the person. Or and so I'm curious, how should I be thinking about gifts for another woman, um, especially my brother's girlfriend?
Specifically in like fashion, like how to shop for them fashion wise.
Just in general, like Christmas shopping, like I'm at a
Oh,
bit of a loss. Like what's a
yeah.
and I don't want to. It's like I get a candle that's completely impersonal, or I get like a perfume that I think she would smell good in, and it's like
Yeah.
that's weird.
No,
Like
you don't want the perfume. Oh my
right.
gosh.
So I mean, what would you recommend there, or do you have any experience with that?
Have any experience with that? Well, yeah. Well, I would say that on my wife's side of the family, it's all just like outdoors gear, like get someone an outdoors
Hmm.
thing that they like. But for someone who doesn't live like in the middle of the mountains or in the middle of the woods, like you get a more diverse palette of shopping options. Uh hmm.
I think I'm leaning towards like a book or something, but
Yeah.
even that, it's
But books can be scary because depending on the book, you could be insinuating something that they
right,
might be
exactly.
deficient in. So
Which
if you're
honestly,
like,
I
yeah, if
would
you're
be I would be insinuating something too. Like I would get a book
right.
that is like, hey, this may be an area of growth for you.
Yeah, yeah. It'd be funny if you did a coupon book, homemade, of things your brother will do for his girlfriend, but don't tell him what those are.
Mm.
So he's reading through them going like, I don't submit to any of this, but
Right,
he
like
doesn't have a choice because it was a gift to her.
that's true. Like lick your toes.
Yeah.
Yeah, rub the feet. What else
Yeah.
outside of feet?
Yeah, I don't know why you're
I
HD. Are you
promise I don't
revealing
have a
your
foot.
your
I
foot
don't have
fetish
a
right
foot
now?
fetish. I don't. Okay. Uh,
Careful,
all right.
Madeline.
Well,
All
I
right.
feel like I'm kind of back to the drawing board on it, but here goes nothing.
It's gonna be
If you can give
alright.
your community permission, especially with men, it can go a long way.
I feel it in my
And
heart.
only from that place of peace can a relationship truly be reconciled.
I saw the first.
The sun
Wow.
is shining bright.
But if I stop and create a little space, then there's that room for a response. Then I can actually check in with myself.
It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be okay. Let it go, carry on. Let it go, carry on.
Welcome, everybody, to the Dudes with Feelings podcast. It is just two guys here sharing feelings today. It's just myself. I'm McKenzie Beeby, and I'm here with Henry Davis,
Maybe we
owner.
can tell people how we initially met, Mackenzie.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, we could. Henry and I met, in short, we met at a summer camp. And Henry was a tryhard in every element of camp. Camp had these awards. They're called emblems, and Henry was just always big on getting all of the activity emblems and character emblems. And I always thought he was just a tryhard because of it. I would use a different phrase if we're not, in a podcast, but
yeah, yeah, like a high achiever or something, kind of
yeah,
like that, more in that
way,
range.
way too much an
No,
overachiever,
a high achiever, I think is what you mean.
overachiever. And he would always kiss up to the counselors, and yeah, not a good example of how a kid should act.
Uh, yeah, as you can tell, Mackenzie and I, we didn't immediately vibe. I was a bit more in the the honor camper category, and McKenzie was in a bit more of the
Just just
mischievous.
just getting through the summer.
Just getting
That's
to
just getting through the summer where I have clothes left that aren't
right.
ruined by, just being in the outdoors.
Well, the irony is that McKenzie has since. So I guess your first summer was what year?
2004, 2003 or
Okay.
2004.
So I
2003.
came, and I came in 2006. So I was 10. I
Yeah.
turned 11 that summer. That was when we first met. And you have since gone how many summers in a row?
I just finished my 20th summer, so I haven't taken a summer off since my
So
first one.
20 summers in a row to this summer camp.
Yeah.
So if you guys need some context into why, this is something that's near and dear to Mackenzie's heart, he has worked or been at a boys camp or worked at a boys camp for 20 summers in a row.
20 years. Yeah, this will
Um,
be 21.
and we
Yeah.
never really were that close at camp, but we started making this film together. Mackenzie had some editing experience, and I knew that, so I called him and what we would say yogied him into agreeing to help with this project. Just said, "Hey, we're really looking for some help in this." Pause, wait for it, and he agreed to help. And I would
After a
say that
couple phone calls, I knew what you were doing, but I wasn't.
right, okay, well,
You just kept calling, and I eventually I was like, I remember specifically. I was like, you know what? Just send me what you're looking at. Let me go through it. Like talk to you about it, and we'll figure this out. And it inevitably happened that you ended up coming to visit shortly after with Fletch, and that's how I met Fletch.
and this project that we were working on, at the time, it was the story of a traveling love wizard. For context, which sounds strange. It was strange, but there was, it was a bit more normal than it may sound because he was a fairly normal seeming guy, and we had the opportunity to follow him across different countries. He was trying to go to 60 different countries. And so once we had shot this film and we had thought about it, and a lot in large part we wanted to explore this idea of love, right? What does love really mean, in the grander sense of the word, across race and culture and religion, and so we started interviewing people all over, trying to just deepen our understanding of love, and was what the wizard was doing, is that fit within this greater idea of love? And all of this naturally becomes a really deep conversation. And Mackenzie, I don't want to speak for you. Where were you at in your life at that point? Because in many ways, those early conversations were kind of forming the seed that is now Dudes with Feelings.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, speak to that.
I when Henry and Fletch visited, I was just out of a fresh breakup with a girl I'd been dating for 2 years. We lived together and all that, and so when they came and wanted to talk about love and and talk about this really strange concept of a video, um, I was doing it to help a friend. I'll just leave it at that. I was not doing it because I was interested in the project. Um, because there was a lot of things they were saying that I was just like, I'm not even, we're not even at the same level here. I'm not like what you're talking about with love. I've never contemplated. I've never wanted to contemplate. I've never felt the need to like do that internal work. Um, I was still very much in the mindset of my emotions happen to me. Other people cause emotions to happen to me. And just like my job is to find ways to react as best as I can to the things that happen to me in life.
Mm.
And uh and so yeah, when you guys came, I was like, wow, we have very different personalities. Which
So
led to an interesting dynamic at the first start of the sessions.
when do you feel like it started to mean something more to you, or you started to see, hey, maybe these conversations are important, or exploring this actually has real impact on my life?
I would say what attracted me to keep working on the project until we started shifting our editing sessions down to NOLA was just like, you hear about, you fill your own glass and that pours out to other people. What attracted me to the project once I started actually editing with you guys was just you, Fletch, and Augie's personality were things that were very magnetizing. Is that even a word? Magnetizing.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Magnetic.
magnetic. Yeah, that's a better way. Magnetic. And so I was motivated by that. And then when we got to NOLA, everything quickly changed. But um, for the time when we were in Chicago, I was living in my office. I had a blow up mattress and because I didn't want to live with my ex. And uh and so I was like, gosh, these guys feel like they're living a happier life than I'm capable of living. So
Mm.
um let's see a little bit more of what this is all about.
Mm. Well, you talked about in NOLA. So, just for context, Fletch and I were finishing school at Tulane in New Orleans. And so, to finish the film, McKenzie actually came and lived with us in New Orleans. And we were editing while we were in school. It was quite a period of our lives. And it really was a period of pretty intense growth and transformation, I would say, personally, for each of us, I think, in our own way. Um, and I think it, to me, segues into this conversation of spirituality that we're going to have today, which that period um, was really almost like a crash course in spirituality and exploring our relationship. In many ways, because the film was at a certain point, I feel like when we're exploring a concept like love, questions arise, which is, what do I think about this? Where does love come from? Who created love? Where does it live? And how do I share it? All these things that we were starting to talk about. I'm curious to hear from you. I mean, what was that period like for you? And yeah, maybe just more broadly to how spirituality started to work its way into your journey.
Yeah, I mean, so I've never been to NOLA before, and then I flew down there in the midst of February, and at that time in Chicago there was a massive polar vortex, and I knew that New Orleans was pretty warm, so I didn't pack like a coat or anything, and I just remember I remember 3 in the morning waking up, going to the train, and it's negative 20, 30 degrees out, and I'm in like a fleece. Like I'm not even in any sort of like real winter coat or anything. And I remember just thinking to myself, this is so dumb. I, I'm having to endure so much of this already, and it's already causing so many problems to have to upend my life and move to or to visit NOLA for an extended period of time. And get down to NOLA, and I think when I got there, I quickly realized just how much more socially ingrained into their college culture that Henry and Fletch were compared to my college experience, which was in Chicago. There was no like uh you would just go and hang out in people's apartments, and it was always like small gatherings. It wasn't ever just this like doors open, let your friends come and go in the house whenever you want. Like it was a very interesting dynamic that I wasn't used to. And so Henry, Fletch, and a couple of their other friends started mentioning uh, something called the Garden. And I'm working on this film. I'm not even thinking about whatever this is. I didn't think I was going to go or anything like that. They didn't tell me what it was. They didn't tell me um, any context behind it. Only it was just a group of friends who just met up and talked, um, which was a complete lie. But
Well, as
I
part of it,
digress.
it
I
was part of it.
digress. I digress.
I think you thought we
And
were going to smoke a blunt or
I
something, but
literally, when you said the Garden, and I'm in New Orleans, I'm like, oh, you guys are going to go into someone's backyard, talk, and smoke weed, and I, yeah, that's
I
my
mean,
initial reaction.
partially because at camp we called the bar the library, so I could see why you would think
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, everything has a hidden message, has a hidden meaning. Yeah, for sure. But so it was on. Oh, what days were they on? Saturdays, Saturday
Saturday
evenings.
night.
Yeah, Saturday evenings. So Henry, the Saturday, was like, hey, you should come if you're wanting to. I'd love to have you. And I'm like, great. I'm just gonna sit with a bunch of guys smoking weed all night. And uh, I was like, fine, I'll go. Whatever. Like technically, they're the ones who tell me when to edit or not, and they're telling me not to edit. I'm cool with that. So went to the garden, and it was just a crazy, crazy experience.
What was it?
That first session that I went to, uh, once instruments came out. Well, it was like we first walked in, and the group of people who were in this garden, whatever, in this house, was not who I would consider avid weed smokers. Like just you look at this group of people. There was, older women. There was older guys. There was couples. There was um,
People
college
coming off the
kids.
streets.
Yeah, people coming straight off the streets, and it was just a really diverse group of people. And we go down into this basement of this house, and then a couple people brought guitars, and they started playing music, and everyone kind of started getting quiet, and it turned into worship, which was a really interesting thing to witness for the first time.
Hmm.
I'd never my parents, like, we grew up in an old Presbyterian style of church. Um, you dress up in a suit, go to a church, and it's all just music that you kind of don't resonate with nowadays. It's like very archaic music, big organ, it gives me like Catholic vibes. And then I'm in this group, and they're worshiping, and they're all doing their own thing, and it was jarring, and very uncomfortable, that first session, and it lasted, like, the worship lasted for like 45 minutes. Like, it lasted. I was thinking, like, oh my gosh, this is so long. um this is so long, and everyone's doing the same things for 45 minutes. Like, how can people do that? um and so, yeah,
Hmm.
that was kind of the first week that I went.
Yeah, and maybe just to back it up from my angle, because the garden was something that I had the privilege of helping start with a friend of mine who played a big role in um, just in my journey as well. He was part of this Blue Marble project and its origin, and
We mentioned him a couple episodes ago, Chris.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which there's a whole story here that we're not going to be able to tell the whole thing. But I grew up in a Christian, socially Christian house, and a lot of moving around churches, kind of similar to you, Mackenzie. Like, never really feeling super connected, except maybe one point where we were actually involved in starting a church when I was 12. And I remember just feeling like shocked. It was like, wait a second, people want to be here. And I
Yeah.
remember that feeling of like, wow, I was so used to this sense of feeling like people felt like they needed to be there. And it was so rare to be in a space where it was like, wow, people really want to be here. And they believe what's being said, and they believe they're actually worshiping in God when they're singing. And I remember that felt different. And I kind of went on my own journey, and just that didn't feel important to me really at all. That I would even think God, and would just have categorized myself very much in that agnostic category. It just lived in the subconscious mind. I didn't care. I didn't see value in it. And I think, eventually beginning to go on this journey of the film and the Blue Marble project as a whole, which was this idea of how do we live our best day, no matter the circumstances. What does it mean to live a day that really matters? It started to force me to confront, well, what do I think really matters? And I mean, I remember we were home, and we were just kind of in a weird place in the project. And my grandmother, who was always giving me the Bible verses from the Y, and she asked me straight up, where is God in Blue Marble? And at the time in this project we were working on, it was like, well, in the values, right? And what we're wanting to spread and good stuff. And um, I remember she in that moment handed me this mini Bible, and there was this one verse highlighted, and I always remember it. It was Romans 12, and it read, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God, to be a living and holy sacrifice. This is truly the way to worship Him. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new creation by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." And I mean, I'll always remember it because it just struck me. And it was like, wow, okay, if that's true, like if if God has a will for my life, if that's a real thing, at least I want to know if it's real. I want to know what that is. And I know that that scripture ended up kind of sending me, at least giving me a little bit more energy to like, well, let me think about this thing. Like, who is God? What is that? And that in conjunction with this film we were making on love, it forced me to do some things that I hadn't done in my life. One, open myself, asked myself the question, if God was actually real and was speaking to me, would I even be open enough to hear or to see it? And the answer was no. So first I had to open myself to actually the possibility that God could be real. Um, and I think in that just little, Bible says, a mustard seed of faith, right? That started to lead me on this journey. I always struggled with this idea of Jesus because it felt like that was divisive. And I had explored in paths of Buddhism and Hinduism, and I'd done a lot of yoga and all these different arenas of spirituality that I was starting to explore. Um, but I think it was really in exploring this film on love that forced me to open up the Bible and actually read it for the first time in my life. And I read the book of John, and I remember just reading about what Jesus was doing in his time on earth, and like actually for the first time thinking about it in my own, like, what do I think about this? And I just came into a place in which it started to click. It started to make sense that um, if it, Jesus says, those who seek to find their life will surely lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake will surely find it. And I was in that place where I felt like I was trying to force like myself to this place of meaning and goodness and this optimized life. And I reached this breaking point in that period of my life where I was like, you know what, I'm putting my hands up. I can't do it myself. Like, I actually need, if God is real, I need you, God. I need you to step in the gap and and show up for me. And he did. And I encountered something that I had never experienced, felt it in my body, experienced it in a way that would forever change me. And fast forward, we're back in college. I had taken a year off, and Chris and I just started gathering a small group, and months later it was a bigger group and a bigger group, and now McKenzie's in the door, and all of a sudden the conversation is shifting on like, well, what is spirituality? And I think, McKenzie, you were in that place of maybe having to contemplate. You were kind of forced. I don't know if it was even against your will, a little bit, like to forced to confront, what do I think about this? And
Yeah.
I just more and more, I can't help but feel like asking the question, and this, the purpose of this podcast is not to force an answer, but just to say that asking the question is so transformative and it's so helpful. And I resisted it for so long. And I'm curious what you think about that, McKenzie. Like, when you got to that point where you're like, okay, I actually need to think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did
No,
that
you're
happen?
you're exactly right. I felt forced into a situation in which I had to think about it for the first time and how it applied to my life. Um, you could say that's bad, you could say that's good, but that's what happened. And what I got out of that first session that made me extremely curious was the misunderstanding I've had about religion or about Christianity my entire life. Um, Grew up, like I said, in an old Presbyterian environment, and um, I felt very much so that religion was teaching me that it was all about trying to act good, trying to be good, do good things. And by not doing those good things, you get punished. And that's what religion sets out to do, is to make you good. Um, and as I grew up, I never matured that understanding of it. And it wasn't until I was in that situation around all these people worshiping that after 20, 30 minutes of after the worship, everyone broke out into small groups and I'm hearing people talk about it. And something clicked in my mind of, they're not talking about what they're doing to try to be good. They're talking about how to get more honest with God, how to get more intimate and closer with God, rather than what God thinks of me, um, and whether I'm doing the things He wants me to do.
Mhm.
There was no focus on that. All the focus was on just, how can I get as close to God as possible? And
Mm.
that really made me curious as to why that is. Why was getting so close to God so desirable for these people? Uh, and I thought that was a really interesting thing, which is why I was open to going to the next one the following week, because I'd never seen religion in that way. I'd never viewed Christianity in that way. And there was something very non judgmental about that,
Mm.
that I was way more open to than, say, if I went to, back to the church that I grew up at.
Yeah. No, I so connect to that, like this evolution from religion to relationship, where it's like, wait, no, if we actually are saying we believe God is real and Jesus comes to tell us he wants relationship with us, he wants friendship, then like that seems like the highest good. How can I be friends with God? What does it mean to talk and be vulnerable and to actually enter into this relationship? Um, no, that's really good. And I connect to this idea of like religion, which I don't consider myself a religious person. Um, Although my relationship with Jesus is the most important relationship in my life. And I just feel like religion says to try harder. And I believe the kingdom is telling us to stop trying so hard. That's actually only by receiving God's love for me. And that's it's been the hardest part, right? Because I'm struggle to receive love. It's a lot easier for me to give it. But you talked about the glass overflowing and how do we live from a place of overflow? Well, for me, it's like, well, I need to be receiving more love than I'm giving in order to stay in overflow. So embedding my identity as beloved first and foremost, like I cannot grow in love in how loved I am. Um, that has been the transformative truth of my life is wow, like I am worthy, I am unique, I am loved, and allowing that to root down my life so that I can live from that place. Um, it's certainly it's a journey and it's not it's not always clean, but for me, that's kind of the essence of my spirituality is it starts with recognizing how loved I am.
Yeah, I mean, I the other day I was working on putting all of my journal entries and notes from just my entire life um, into my computer, and I came across one of the first notes I wrote during that week, and it was, God isn't looking for persecution, he's looking for honesty.
Mm.
And that was kind of how I left that session. I left that session, and at some point that week I wrote this down, and um, that changed my entire viewpoint of Christianity, um, and
Wow.
it made me open to it for the first time.
Mm.
uh, yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. And I'm curious to know just like I know and share anything else on that journey, but just kind of how that's evolved to today for you and where you feel like you're at with your spirituality, how you're feeding that spirituality today.
Yeah, I think in one way it comes up in prayer and what that looks like for me. I never related to the prayers in which it was a call and repeat, where the pastor says something and I repeat it. And going along this premise of God is looking for honesty, and he knows my every thought, he knows my every urge, my every temptation. um, I look at prayer differently, as a sense of God isn't looking for me to say the right things in my prayer. He's looking for me to acknowledge the things that I feel as though I can't acknowledge from within. He wants me to get more honest with him, and as a result, I get more honest with myself. And there's something radical in that a lot of people, I think, misunderstand with prayer, which is prayer is not to say the right things. Prayer is to get more intimate and to get as close to God as you possibly can,
Mm,
and acknowledge the things that you're struggling with, acknowledge the anger, acknowledge any sort of resentment you have towards God or anything like that. And
mm,
I really struggled with that for a long time, with understanding the need for prayer. And for me, prayer takes more of a form of meditation in that way, rather than just, oh, I'm saying this prayer that I heard on the internet, or I'm saying this prayer I've heard in church. It's more unique every single time I do it, but it helps a lot with bringing context, bringing a sense of um, humbling myself to my experiences and humbling myself to my humanity. um, and that is how it's really transpired in modern day, is how I'm looking at prayer, um, and how I'm conducting my prayer.
mm,
It's an extremely intimate thing, and I don't share it with many people, but um, it's something in which I, I want people to understand that that's how I view prayer, and it's been widely successful and productive for me in that
mm,
way.
mm. Yeah, back to that relational piece. That's really good. Like God desires our vulnerability, and nothing's too like big or messy for him. I love one of the ways the Holy Spirit is referred to as his counselor, um, and I feel that a lot too. So that's awesome, man. I think prayer, you're right, is super misunderstood. It's something I've struggled with sometimes because I'm like, okay, if God knows all my thoughts, why am I praying? And I think it prayer often exposes the state of my heart for me. And I think where I've been is recognizing still in a lot of ways, I've been looking to God and often to people, expecting them to serve me. And I think I'm in that transition of really actually um, getting to a place in my life where it's not like I'm not trusting in God because he's serving me, but because I'm serving him. And that's where I want to be in my relationships too, is like I don't want to expect to be served in them. Certainly we want a mutual exchange, all that, but
Yeah.
um, I think that's huge. And I feel that prayer, when we talk about like men and getting vulnerable with men, my prayer life empowers greater vulnerability. Um, if I feel understood, forgiven by God, I have so much more courage to share that with you because I know I'm good. Right. And now I can share that and I can be vulnerable with you and we can talk about things, not from a place of shame, which I don't believe, healthy spirituality does. Shame is healthy spirituality should reduce shame. It should not create shame. And I know we talk about this with men's issues all the time. I mean, shame is a pervasive force. It's sneaky and it's often, in a weird way, prideful. Um, but for me, that prayer life is a place where I can take the shame and start to work through it, so that I can go out and be more effective in my relationships and more vulnerable in my relationships.
Yeah. And when you think about it in this lens, you also realize that prayer isn't for God.
Mm-hmm.
I believe this wholeheartedly, which is, if God knows my every thought, he's not wanting me to pray for him.
Right.
He's wanting me to pray for myself,
And for others.
um, and for others. But really, to pray with intent in being honest with yourself, that there's a lot of accountability to that, self
Mhm.
accountability. And I think when we talk a lot about like beloved identity, I think a lot of it has to do with, are you being honest with yourself? Um, and I think that's really, really important. Like I wrote this one thing: if you believe in what your identity is and what you want it. Sorry, I'm gonna not read this because I actually butchered the whole sentence. I'm gonna mark that. Let me see what it's trying to say. Oh, it's like, if you believe in the sense of beloved identity, you're believing in this idea that um, exterior factors are not going to influence your sense of self, your sense of value, your sense of
Mhm.
being. It can only be influenced by your relationship with God,
Mhm.
and I think that's a really um, interesting element to this.
Yeah,
Um,
that's so good because everything changes if I believe that about myself, right? And I want to take this to men because this is something that changed in my heart and is continuing to be worked out, right? I see a lot of men who are high achievers, who are gunning for a goal and a dream. And I know that when I'm in that place, and especially before I engaged in my spirituality and that became real to me, if I got honest in my heart, I was doing it because I was working for my identity. I was working for my worth. I was working to be approved, to be respected, all of these things that I didn't have to work for, right? And that in receiving that and believing that about myself in the way that God, I believe, came to tell us that's true, that it transforms my motivation, right? Now I'm working from a place of service and from a place of worth and really rest because I don't have to strive to get there. And that's to me what I mean, at least when it relates to work, spirituality completely changes the motivation, the fuel by which I'm being driven. And it just feels so different to me. I can show up way lighter to my work. I can enjoy it so much more. And really, I think I can create so much more if I'm working from a place of beloved identity, worth, the truth of how I believe I've been created.
yeah, that's so good, and it made me think about this concept, tying it back into men and how men can start viewing their life differently and how it looks to them when they reach this sense of beloved identity. I've heard so many times men in the groups that I facilitate and the sessions I run say, she made me feel this way, or this situation has made me feel anger, guilt, humiliation, injustice. And what I always tie it back to them with is, in a non spiritual sense, is why are you letting other these other people in your life have so much power on you? Because, yeah, you could be going through a divorce and your ex-wife could be doing some pretty damaging things to you. But if you can get into a sense of beloved identity and acknowledge that your relationship with God can help you heal through any sort of trauma that's happening in the exterior, and can allow you to continue to feel loved and whole and valuable, regardless of what someone in your exterior life is telling you, you've reached a pretty impenetrable place, pretty resilient place,
Mm,
and a place in which you don't need some of these emotions that can be damaging to you,
mhm,
or you don't need to stay in a place of coping in which you feel like you don't have an answer, or a place in which you feel lost or numb to any emotions, because if you're
mhm,
truly being honest with yourself, you know that that's not true. and you
Mm,
know that your value is in just your humanity alone,
mm,
regardless of what someone has done to you or forced you to do.
right.
Um, yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. Uh, and I think I have a friend who recently has been prioritizing her spirituality, and she asked me this. She's like, "Hey, like, there's things that I used to do that I can't do anymore. Like, it's just I have no desire in my heart anymore, and like I'm losing this and that, and it's painful, and I'm grieving things." And it made me realize, and as someone who's explored in a lot of different spiritual realms, and I'm not here to convince you of anything. Uh, if it Good spirituality requires us to let go of something, some piece of ourselves. It requires us to sacrifice, because that's the ultimate expression of love, self-sacrifice, right? So if I'm pursuing spirituality in some way and it's not asking me to give up anything, then chances are it's not transformative. It's not deeply moving our spirit, or redeeming you in any way. And so I would just say this is the most beautiful journey. I mean, it's given me so much meaning and just juice in my life. It's also been incredibly painful, because that piece of me that wanted to get offended when someone insulted me is the part of me that I'm killing off. Literally, like, is dying every day as I continue to seek God, and seek my spirituality and prioritize my spiritual core. Um, so, a lot of people don't tell you that it can be painful,
Yeah.
because it is quite literally shedding parts of yourself.
I found so much of what you said accurate in the sense of, I found so much empowerment in being able to let go of this feeling that I had to find ways to prove that I'm valuable to myself.
Mm,
There's something extremely liberating and painful in relinquishing the expectation that I have to provide my own value, and instead read the Bible and understand that God finds me valuable
mm,
regardless of my actions. Um, you letting go and leaning in are the two ways in which I can grow that more intimate relationship with God, relinquishing some of these qualities of my humanity that are causing me pain, and leaning into a sense of not needing some of those things anymore
mhm,
because it's already provided to me.
right.
Jesus died on the cross to make sure of that. And that's where, in my journey going into that following week in the garden, and I opened up and finally decided to um, lean into spirituality and a relationship with Jesus, was because of that premise and that understanding. I can live a life now with so much peace and clarity in what I'm doing, because I no longer have to focus on trying to show people that I'm valuable.
Mm. Gosh, yeah. How much more helpful am I to the people around me when I'm
How
willing?
much, and you think about like
Yeah.
how much time you waste and how many
Right.
decisions you make in pursuit of proving your value,
Hmm.
when you don't have to be doing that, and you can live a life more mission oriented, in which you
Right.
can make decisions on, how can I make humanity better? How can I make
Hmm.
people who are in pain heal? And that's ultimately led me to this journey of, being a coach and a facilitator for men, and writing on the topic, and really
Yeah.
engulfing into this issue, is because I see a lot of men who are quietly suffering in silence is what we call it.
Hmm.
And there's such a lack of empathy and compassion for men when they're going through something versus women in our culture. And that bothers me so much, because I see, I've had so many friends and acquaintances and people in my community end up dying as a result of an action, a coping mechanism to feeling valuable and
Mm.
feeling like they want to matter to people.
Mm. Yeah, man. I feel like with this conversation of spirituality, a lot of people think about the things they'd have to give up, right, and get stuck there. Like I was speaking to someone recently who was like, I just don't want to give up. I don't want to give up drinking. I don't want to give up uh, sex. I don't want to give up these things. And it's like, that's just forget. Stop that. That's not the point, right? Like genuine spirituality is a circumcision of the heart. It changes your heart and will literally mold you from the inside out. So if you're going from the outside in, that's religion as I see it. Like it what does it look like to let your heart be molded? And you may be listening to this like this is silly. I don't believe in God. And there's all these scientific reasons why I tell you God's not real and that's fine, but I would argue that you have a God. You're worshiping something. All of us are. And we have to figure out what do I want that to be? Because the highest good in my life, the thing that I determined to be the most important thing is the Lord of my life. It's controlling my life. And I will be limited by that. And my ability to love people will be limited by what the highest love object in my life, the thing that I love the most. And I just offer like think about what is that to you? What is the thing that you're worshiping, the God of your life? And at least just be willing to explore. And then you're already on the path of spirituality, right? Just by asking the question. And I think that that's my hope in even doing this podcast is just to say, well, maybe there's value in the question because I would offer, because this is true for me, that even though I wasn't willing to ask the question for so long, it was controlling my life. It was determining my meaning. It was motivating me to believe I needed to work for my worth. It was shaping everything about my life. The things that I believe about myself, about God, about love, about how I got here and where I'm going. These questions that we so want to avoid because they don't have a clear-cut answer a lot of times are the most important thing in terms of shaping our reality, in terms of shaping our experience in life, our mental health, our relationships. So this conversation is important. And wherever you're at with it is perfectly okay too. And I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing.
I'd offer another way of viewing this idea of, oh, I don't want to give up alcohol. I don't want to give up sex. I don't want to give up whatever. Um, Maybe you're viewing this in a non-productive way, like what you said, from the outside in, rather than thinking of, wow, I don't want to give up this. I don't want to give up that. Maybe asking yourself the question, am I missing out? Am I missing out because of a refusal to give up?
Mm.
And what if I'm missing out, what am I missing out of? Or what is the thing that I'm missing out of? What is, if I'm missing out, how am I missing out? Am I missing out of a life of fulfillment? Am I missing out of a life in which I feel valuable, in which I feel whole, in which I feel human, and uh, I feel a sense of joy in just being alive? And is alcohol or is some of these things in my life that I'm using, are they being used as coping mechanisms because of the fear of what I could be missing out on or the fear of that unknown? Am I running to comfort as a result of that fear of not knowing what that horizon may bring? That's where I felt a lot of the hesitation is um, viewing religion and and spirituality as one and seeing it as a cohesive thing. They're related, but they're not the same. And I think you described that well. Religion is the outside looking in versus spirituality and a relationship with Jesus is supposed to be focused on the inside looking out and um, healing that inside rather than hearing from people as to how you
Mm,
should heal that inside. So, yeah, I really got a lot of what you said there because I completely agree with it all.
mm. Yeah, I mean, there's usually some fear. Like fear is the biggest detriment to authentic spirituality. Um,
Yeah,
and
there's a
so,
fear of loss
mhm,
of the version of yourself that you've grown accustomed to.
yeah,
And that fear of loss, if you face it, you're going to experience grief. And that doesn't feel great to know that you're going to have to walk into grief from that
mm,
fear of loss. Because you are losing an element of yourself. You are losing something inside of you that you felt was giving you comfort and answers for a very long time. And
mhm,
the fear of the unknown is the thing that's keeping you in that sense of not wanting to lose those things. And I just, again, I think it goes back to, are you missing out?
mm, yeah. And so much of the things that are deeply transformative are not the cultural norm. To lose your life for my sake is to find it. It's like, what? Death? Like personal death is what's going to lead to personal breakthrough? Like that's hard to wrap the mind around. It's something that has to be experienced.
Yeah.
And all it takes, like, for my journey, and I recognize that all of us are on our own journey and path, but I know that none of it happens, and certainly I never would have come to experience God if I didn't at least open myself to the potential that it was possible, that it was true. And you just have to have a little bit of openness. And I know sometimes there's a lot of heavy language around God, and we all have our own
Oh, yeah.
associations with that. I know I did. I know McKenzie does. I know probably everyone listening to this podcast may struggle with the word God, or just the way that you grew up in church, and or that now that Jesus has become politicized, and there's all these things that just get in the way of the authentic heart transformation, all these built up ideas. Um, I would just offer, get clear with yourself. Like, put all the other humans aside for a minute, recognize our imperfection as humans, and just, what do you think about it? And be willing to play around in the questions, to talk to people. I think the conversation's important, which is why I'm really grateful that we could have it today.
Yeah. And my last point is I had a lot of resentment and anger towards God for a long, long time. And I think that made me feel as though I didn't believe in him. If I can have so much anger and resentment towards this being, this mystical being that I can't see, um, it must not be true. It must not be real. But I found that eventually I brought that, in the effort to make myself more honest with God, I brought that resentment and anger into my relationship with God.
Hmm.
And I let it front and center. Um, like, fine, God, like, you want a relationship with me? Let's boogie. Let's talk. Um, and it was amazing how much I got in answers from diving into the Bible, from talking to other people who are feeling the same way, and the answers that God has for those feelings of resentment and anger. How could you do this? How could you be doing this to other people and not do this to me? How could you, you know, let someone go starving and I get to live in a comfortable house? Those answers are there, um, but you have to bring them into that relationship in order to
Hmm.
truly have that answer. Um, And for the sake of time, I won't dive into those
Yeah.
answers, but
No, it's
but
so true though, man. We need to bring our doubts out into
yeah.
the open. Like it's critical for faith that we bring our doubt, and we recognize some of it. There's mystery, and can we find beauty in the mystery? It's been
Yeah,
something I've had to find.
we have so many opinions and we have so many thoughts on things that we never actually verbalize and we never actually bring up to the light. And that's why debate is supposed to be super, super healthy. That is why a relationship with God is supposed to be really healthy. You're bringing these things, these opinions, these thoughts that you have into the limelight and actually putting them on a pedestal and seeing if they hold to criticism, seeing if they hold to prosecution, seeing if they
Hmm.
hold to a different line of thinking. And it helps
Hmm.
formulate a stronger sense of clarity in your own life. And I think
For sure.
that's the overall mission, right? Is to like find greater clarity in the purpose of your life. Because
Hmm.
if you don't find that, you're letting situations in your life dictate whether you feel as though you've had a good life or not.
Mm. Yeah, and a humbling truth, I believe, is if you have a question about some of this and you're wrestling with something and you have doubt, you are not the only person that has asked that question. Every question's been asked, and people have explored this genuinely. And bringing it out into the open, you realize, wow, we step into an amazing past of people that have authentically explored spirituality and have allowed it to transform them. And it's exciting. And I hope that, when you guys listen to this, we're nearing the end here. I hope that you leave encouraged, and uh, just want to encourage you wherever you're at. Once again, it's perfect. It's right where you need to be. And so what's the best next step is the question I would ask. What's the best next step for you to genuinely pursue a more spiritual life, or a life where spirituality becomes um, something that has value for you.
Yeah. Ditto.
All right, bro. I appreciate the chat. I feel like we need Fletch here to say something because he always ends with a final word. Do you have one for us today?
No, I don't.
Oh my armadillo.
Armadillo.
Thanks for listening, guys. We really appreciate you sticking with us. And if you're enjoying this podcast, it's super helpful if you can rate it. Wherever you listen, just review it. That's how people discover it, or send it to a friend. That would be a wonderful Christmas gift to us. And we so appreciate each of you. Hope you have an awesome holiday, and we'll see you next week. Peace.